Have you ever wondered how one small, seemingly insignificant moment could change the entire course of your life? A single mistake, one tiny mishap, and your life is never the same again. That's exactly what happened to Emily. Picture this, a posh art gallery, the kind that whispers of wealth and exclusivity, where every piece is carefully curated, every inch polished, and every moment feels like it could be a part of a larger, untold story. Emily wasn't exactly the type to fit in with such a world. In fact, she didn't even belong in that gallery in the first place. But that didn't stop her. And little did she know, that the moment she stepped into the gallery, everything was about to change. Let me take you back to that evening. It was a crisp fall night, the kind where the city lights shimmered off the streets like scattered stars, and the air felt alive with possibility. Emily, a young woman with big dreams but not much to her name, found herself at the opening of an art exhibition she could never afford to attend. How did she end up there? Well, that's a story in itself. She had been invited by someone she barely knew, a friend of a friend, or more like a vague acquaintance who assured her that she was welcome. In reality, she didn't even know the first thing about art. She wasn't someone who would typically hang out in galleries, sipping wine and discussing avant-garde masterpieces. But the invitation, though unexpected, sparked something in her. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the promise of stepping into a world where, just for a night, she could pretend to belong. The gallery was everything Emily expected and more. The space was large, with high ceilings and polished marble floors that echoed the whispers of sophisticated conversations. The walls were adorned with paintings, sculptures, and vases, all meticulously arranged to showcase both the talent of the artists and the wealth of those who owned the collection. In that room, art was not just something to look at, it was something to be admired, appreciated, and revered. Emily wandered through the exhibit, feeling out of place among the impeccably dressed guests. She tried to blend in, sipping her wine, nodding politely as people discussed pieces she could hardly understand. But then came the moment that would change everything. She wasn't paying attention when she bumped into the table holding a beautiful, antique vase, a delicate work of art in itself, one that seemed to command the attention of anyone who passed it. It happened so fast. A slip, a misstep, and before she could even react, the vase toppled off the table, shattering into pieces. The sound of the porcelain shattering on the marble floor echoed throughout the gallery like a bomb going off. Time seemed to freeze for a second as everyone turned to look, and Emily felt her face go white. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink into the floor. This was the kind of disaster you couldn't recover from, especially not in a place like this. The guests were silent, their eyes locked on the mess she had just made. It was one of those moments when you want to scream, "No, this isn't happening." But it is happening. There's no going back. She had ruined something beautiful, something priceless. The weight of the mistake felt unbearable. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of the fury she had anticipated, a calm, almost eerie silence followed. People weren't angry. They weren't looking at her with judgment. In fact, they were looking at her with curiosity. One woman in particular, an older, sharply dressed lady, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she appraised Emily not with disdain, but with something else entirely. Something that made Emily's heart race in her chest. The lady smiled and approached her slowly, the room still filled with an unspoken tension. "You've done it now," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "But maybe this is exactly what we need." Emily blinked, unsure of what was happening. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the lady cut her off. "Tell me something," she continued, her voice suddenly softer, almost intrigued. "What do you see in this?" She gestured to the broken vase. It lay there, shards scattered across the floor, its delicate beauty now a tragic heap of destruction. Emily, still in a daze, found herself staring at the pieces of porcelain. I see something ruined," she said, almost to herself. The lady nodded slowly, as if contemplating her answer. "Perhaps. But then again, perhaps we see something else. Something new." She paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her words were laced with a strange intensity. "I think you might just be the artist we've been looking for." "Wait, what? An artist?" Emily was no artist. She barely knew the difference between abstract art and realism. And yet, this woman, someone who clearly belonged to the world of high society and exclusive galleries, was suggesting something she couldn't even comprehend. What was going on here? How could breaking a vase lead to anything positive? Was this some kind of bizarre, twisted joke? But the lady wasn't done. "I have a proposition for you," she said, as if Emily had just been handed the key to a kingdom she never thought she'd enter. "I can offer you an opportunity to do something far beyond what you ever imagined. But you need to trust me. You need to let go of everything you thought you knew about yourself. This moment, the one that feels like your biggest failure, could be the very thing that pushes you into a world of art, of creation, of true recognition." And just like that, Emily's world shifted. What was this woman talking about? An art deal? It sounded absurd. But there was something about the way she spoke, the calm certainty in her voice, that made Emily wonder if there was some truth to it. Could breaking the vase, this careless mistake, actually be the start of something much bigger than anything she could have ever dreamed of? Could a single moment of clumsiness unlock an entirely new chapter of her life? As the evening unfolded, Emily found herself caught between disbelief and curiosity. The lady, whose name was Eleanor, by the way, wasn't just offering advice. She was offering a real opportunity, one that could catapult Emily into a world she never thought she could access. She was offering her an art deal, a chance to create, to shape something beautiful from the wreckage of her mistake. But what did it all mean? Was this a once-in-a-lifetime chance, or was it too good to be true? And more importantly, could Emily rise to the challenge? But there's more to this story than just a lucky break. There's a twist, a dark side to the world of art that Emily never saw coming. Not everyone in the gallery was as welcoming as Eleanor. Some of the guests had their own agendas, their own hidden motives, and as Emily would soon learn, the art world wasn't as glamorous and innocent as it appeared. It was filled with secrets, power struggles, and people who would do anything to get ahead. And now, Emily was a part of it. So, here's the question that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Is Emily's journey into the world of art a dream come true, or a trap that she won't be able to escape from? Can she find her way, or will she get caught up in the web of deceit and manipulation that surrounds the art world? One thing is for sure, her life will never be the same again. Stick with me, and by the end of this video, you'll have the answers to all your questions. You'll find out what happens when Emily takes that fateful step into the unknown, and whether she can turn a broken vase into something more than just a mistake. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. So, are you ready? Stay with me to uncover the secrets of Emily's journey, and let's see how far this crazy ride really goes. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more she thought about what had happened in the gallery, the more she realized how surreal it all seemed. One minute, she was just another face in the crowd, trying to blend into a world she didn't belong to, and the next, she was being offered a chance that could change her life. But there was a catch, there always is. If there's one thing Emily knew from her own experiences, it's that opportunities that seem too good to be true usually are. And yet, here she was, teetering on the edge of something she didn't quite understand, caught between the urge to run away and the strange allure of what Eleanor was offering. To fully understand how she got to that fateful night, though, you need to know a bit more about Emily's life before that shattered vase. She wasn't someone who had always dreamed of being an artist, and she certainly wasn't someone who had ever pictured herself at an exclusive art gallery, rubbing elbows with the wealthy and influential. Emily's background was humble, even a little messy. Raised in a small town in the Midwest, she had always been the type of person who believed in working hard and making do with what you had. Her parents had always pushed her to do well in school, but they didn't have the means to send her to the kind of fancy schools or art programs that might have put her on a more traditional path. Instead, Emily had scraped by, using her creativity in ways that were far from glamorous. She worked part-time jobs, kept a low profile, and always tried to keep her head down. In fact, her artistic side had always been more of a hobby, something she did in private when no one was looking, rather than something she saw as a possible career. Her paintings, sketches, and designs were personal, not meant for public viewing. Art wasn't a world that seemed accessible to someone like her. But that had all changed in the last few months. It started innocently enough. A few months ago, Emily had attended a small gallery opening with a friend of hers, someone she hadn't seen in years. They had grown up together but lost touch after Emily moved to the city to start fresh. When her friend reached out to invite her to a local show, Emily hadn't thought much of it. It was a small affair, not much different from the kind of shows she'd seen before. But something about it had caught her eye. The way the artists talked about their work, the way they described their process, it was captivating. For the first time, Emily felt like she was in the presence of people who truly understood what she had always felt about creating. It was a moment that sparked something inside her, a tiny flame that grew stronger with each passing week. She found herself going to more gallery openings, attending art events, and quietly soaking in everything she could. She began to experiment with her own pieces in a way she had never done before. It was during this period of self-discovery that Emily had encountered Eleanor. She wasn't sure how their paths had crossed exactly, but it hadn't taken long for Eleanor to take notice of her. Eleanor, with her sharp eyes and calculating smile, had a way of seeing through people. She saw something in Emily, something raw and untapped. At first, Emily hadn't given it much thought. She was just another aspiring artist, right? But over time, Eleanor kept showing up in her life. She appeared at the gallery openings Emily attended, would slip into conversations with her about art and inspiration, and more than once made comments about Emily's potential, as though she could see a future for her in the art world that Emily hadn't even imagined. The idea of someone so entrenched in the world of fine art believing in her was flattering, to say the least, but also unsettling. There was something about Eleanor's intense gaze that made Emily uneasy. It was as if she were constantly measuring her, trying to figure out how far Emily could be pushed, how much she was willing to give. As the weeks went by, Emily had started to feel like she was caught in some kind of game. She wasn't sure if it was just her insecurities talking or if there was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. Eleanor had started suggesting things to her, little nudges here and there, encouraging Emily to take risks, to put herself out there more. She would tell Emily to attend bigger events, to network with the right people, and, most importantly, to stop hiding her work away. "You need to show the world what you're capable of," Eleanor would say, her voice smooth and almost hypnotic. "You don't know what doors you're closing by not letting people see who you truly are." At first, Emily had hesitated. She was still a small fish in a big pond, and the art world seemed like a cold, impersonal place. There were rumors, whispers about shady dealings, about artists being taken advantage of by wealthy collectors and gallery owners who didn't have the artist's best interests at heart. Emily had heard these stories from other aspiring artists, tales of contracts that seemed too good to be true and opportunities that ended up feeling more like traps than stepping stones. But there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the pull. Eleanor had an air of confidence and power that made her seem untouchable. She spoke as if she knew exactly how to navigate the high-stakes world of art, and Emily, in her desperate need for validation, had begun to listen. And then, of course, there was the incident, the vase. That moment in the gallery, when everything changed, felt like it had been set in motion long before Emily had ever stepped foot inside that grand hall. Her slip-up, as embarrassing as it was, somehow felt like the culmination of everything she had been working toward, whether she had realized it or not. Eleanor's reaction, the way she had calmly approached Emily and offered her the deal, had left her rattled. How could breaking a vase, destroying something so precious, lead to an opportunity? And yet, there was no denying it, Eleanor had seen something in that moment. Perhaps it wasn't about the vase at all. Maybe it was about the way Emily had reacted, the way she had handled herself after the disaster. But there was another piece to the puzzle that Emily couldn't ignore. As Eleanor spoke, Emily had noticed a few familiar faces lingering around the gallery, faces she hadn't seen in a while but knew well enough to recognize. People from her past, people who, just a few weeks ago, had seemed like harmless acquaintances. Now, however, they seemed to be watching her with more than just curiosity. One man in particular, a wealthy art collector named Julian, had been eyeing her from across the room with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He had been a regular at the gallery openings, always in the background, always lurking in the shadows. There was something about him that felt off, something predatory. And as the night wore on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor and Julian were somehow connected. Perhaps it was just her paranoia, or maybe there was something darker going on, but she couldn't ignore the way their eyes seemed to meet across the room, as if they were exchanging unspoken signals. Was this part of some bigger game? And what role did she play in it? The questions kept piling up, each one more perplexing than the last. Was Eleanor genuinely interested in helping her, or was she just using her as a pawn in some larger, more dangerous scheme? And where did Julian fit into all of this? Emily had no answers, only a growing sense of unease. She knew one thing for certain: the art world wasn't what she had imagined. It was far more complex, far more dangerous than she had ever expected. And now, with an art deal on the table and her future uncertain, Emily had to decide whether she was willing to dive deeper into this world, or whether the cost would be too high. Something was happening, something big. And Emily was in the middle of it, unsure of who to trust, and unsure of whether she would come out of it unscathed. One thing was clear: this wasn't just about art anymore. This was about survival. As the days passed, Emily couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that everything around her was spiraling out of control. The art world, which had once seemed like a mysterious yet glamorous place, was now starting to feel more like a labyrinth, one full of hidden corners, shadowy figures, and unanswered questions. She found herself caught between a burning desire to uncover the truth and the ever-present fear that if she dug too deep, she might uncover something that was better left buried. Eleanor's offer to guide her, to bring her into the fold of the art world, seemed less like a golden opportunity and more like a carefully laid trap. And the more Emily thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle just didn't seem to fit. She had always been someone who trusted her instincts, but lately, her gut was telling her that something sinister was lurking just beneath the surface. It wasn't just the cold, calculating way Eleanor spoke that made her uneasy. It was the things that weren't said, the quiet moments when Eleanor would glance at her in a way that felt like she was measuring her every move. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor had an agenda. And maybe it wasn't just her. Over the past few weeks, Emily had started noticing little things, small, seemingly insignificant details that began to stack up in her mind. Like the strange way Julian, the wealthy art collector, would appear at every gallery opening she attended, always keeping a low profile but never far from sight. At first, she had chalked it up to coincidence. But after a while, it started to feel like more than that. It was as if he were always watching her, waiting for something. But what? She didn't know. And then there was the night she decided to confront Eleanor. She had stayed up late the night before, her mind racing with unanswered questions. She couldn't let herself be lulled into this false sense of security any longer. She needed to know what was really going on, and she needed to know now. When she showed up at the gallery the next evening, she was determined. She'd had enough of the vague answers, enough of the mysterious glances and cryptic comments. She wanted the truth, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. But when she walked through the doors of the gallery, she quickly realized something was off. The usual crowd was there, but Eleanor was nowhere to be found. Emily searched the gallery, moving between the paintings and sculptures, her eyes scanning every face. She felt like a rat in a maze, with nowhere to turn. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, seeing a text from an unfamiliar number: "You're looking in the wrong place. Stop digging or you'll regret it." It was cryptic, unsettling, and it made Emily's heart race. She didn't know who had sent the message, but the warning was clear: someone didn't want her to get too close. But that only fueled her curiosity. What were they hiding? What was so dangerous that they'd go to these lengths to keep her from uncovering it? Emily's pulse quickened as she stared at the text, trying to make sense of it. As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, she caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of her eye, something that stopped her dead in her tracks. It was a small, delicate envelope, half hidden behind a vase on one of the display tables. It wasn't anything particularly special, but something about it caught her attention. Maybe it was the way it was tucked away so carefully, almost like someone had tried to conceal it. Or maybe it was just the gut feeling that told her it was important. She approached it cautiously, her breath shallow as she reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the envelope, she felt a chill run through her spine. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. It wasn't a letter or a note, just a short sentence scribbled in black ink: "Everything is connected. Don't trust anyone." Her heart sank as she stared at the words, trying to process their meaning. Who had left this? Was it Eleanor, trying to send her a cryptic message? Or was it someone else, someone who didn't want Emily to uncover the truth? As she turned the paper over, hoping to find some clue, her eyes widened. There was nothing on the back. No name, no signature, just the same ominous warning. Before Emily could react, a voice behind her made her jump. She spun around to find Julian standing a few feet away, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said softly, almost too calmly. "You never know what you might find when you start looking in the wrong places." Emily felt her blood run cold. Julian. Of course, he had to be involved somehow. He always seemed to be lurking, always just out of reach. His words were like a silent threat, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made her uneasy. It wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. "Why are you here?" Emily asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Julian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "The art world isn't a place for amateurs, Emily," he said, his voice low. "You've been stepping into dangerous territory without even realizing it. Eleanor may think she's in control, but she's not. There's more going on here than you could ever understand." Emily's mind raced. She didn't trust Julian, but his words held an unsettling weight. Was he warning her? Or was he trying to manipulate her, using fear to keep her from digging deeper? The more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't know who to trust. She certainly couldn't trust him. But Eleanor. She had seemed like an ally, someone who could help her navigate this strange new world, yet now Emily wasn't so sure. Every move she made, every person she spoke to, seemed to lead her in a different direction, like a trail of breadcrumbs that kept disappearing before she could pick up on it. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily wanted answers. She needed to know the truth about Eleanor, about Julian, about the mysterious warning. But the deeper she dug, the more obstacles appeared. Evidence disappeared just when she thought she was getting close, and people she thought she could trust began to turn on her in subtle, disturbing ways. Just as she started to pull away from Julian, a sudden noise interrupted the moment, a crash from the far side of the gallery. Emily spun around to see one of the sculptures had toppled over, the sound of breaking glass filling the air. But when she looked back, Julian was gone. Vanished. It was as if he had never been there. The gallery was eerily silent, and Emily stood frozen, the mysterious envelope still clutched in her hand. What was going on? Who had been sending her these messages? And why did it feel like someone was always one step ahead of her? As the night wore on, Emily's unease grew. She knew one thing for certain: whatever was happening, it wasn't just about art anymore. There were dark secrets at play, secrets that someone was willing to go to extreme lengths to keep hidden. And Emily had unwittingly become a part of it. The real question was, would she make it out alive, or would she be swallowed up by the dangerous game she had entered? The answers were out there, but Emily wasn't sure how much further she could go before she became the next casualty. And then, just as she began to turn toward the exit, something caught her eye, a figure standing in the shadows, watching her with an all-too-familiar gaze. It was Eleanor. And for the first time, Emily saw something in her eyes, something darker than she had ever imagined. As Emily's gaze locked onto Eleanor, the unease that had been gnawing at her for days reached a boiling point. The intensity in Eleanor's eyes was unlike anything Emily had seen before. It wasn't the typical calculated coldness that Eleanor had always exuded, it was something more dangerous, more personal. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had paused, leaving Emily trapped in the suffocating silence between them. Eleanor stood just beyond the shadows, her presence heavy, almost oppressive. And before Emily could even begin to ask what was going on, a figure stepped forward from behind her, someone she hadn't expected to see. It was Liam, her brother. Liam had been a constant in her life, someone who had supported her through everything: her move to the city, her wild dreams of being an artist, and the hard years that came with it. They had always been close, even though he was the more pragmatic of the two, more grounded in the reality of their small-town roots. But seeing him here, in the gallery, standing so close to Eleanor, threw Emily off balance. Liam had never shown much interest in the art world. Sure, he appreciated art in its most basic form, but he wasn't the type to attend gallery events or mingle with high society types. So why was he here? And why now, of all times? Liam, what are you doing here? Emily asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and suspicion. She took a cautious step toward him, trying to mask the confusion flooding her thoughts. Liam's eyes flicked from Emily to Eleanor and then back to Emily, but there was something in his expression that made her blood run cold. It wasn't the open affection or warmth she had always seen in his eyes. There was something guarded about him, something that felt off. A hesitation. A distance that wasn't there before. I could ask you the same thing, he replied, his tone too casual, almost rehearsed. I didn't think you were into these kinds of crowds, Em. You always hated this kind of scene. What changed? Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Eleanor spoke first, her voice smooth and almost mocking. Liam has been a very valuable acquaintance of mine for some time now, she said, the way she said valuable making it clear she wasn't talking about art. There was something calculated in her words, as if she were carefully testing the waters, waiting for Emily to react. And Emily did, she couldn't stop herself. A chill ran through her, a sudden wave of realization crashing over her like cold water. The pieces were starting to click into place, but not in the way she expected. The moment Liam had entered the scene, everything about the gallery, about the people in it, felt different. She had always thought she was the one they were after, her art, her talent, her connection to Eleanor. But now, with Liam standing there, it was like something bigger was at play. He wasn't just her brother, he was part of this web. A part she hadn't seen before. Liam, what are you involved in? Emily's voice shook slightly, her instinct screaming at her that something wasn't right. But before he could respond, a sharp, familiar buzz from her phone broke through the tension. Another message. She didn't even need to check it to know it was from the same unknown number. The timing was too perfect. Slowly, she pulled her phone out of her pocket and read the words, her eyes scanning the screen with growing dread. He's been with us longer than you think. Stop asking questions, or the next message will be for him. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, everything in the gallery seemed to blur together, the faces, the conversations, the art that hung on the walls, until only the text on the screen was clear. The next message will be for him. She glanced up at Liam, who stood stiffly, his expression unreadable, though his jaw clenched tightly. He knew something. He had to. Who's behind this, Liam? Emily asked, trying to hold her composure as the room suddenly felt too small, too stifling. Why are you really here? Liam hesitated, his gaze shifting toward Eleanor as if seeking permission or perhaps, waiting for her to make the first move. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before he spoke again. I didn't come here for this, he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. But some things are bigger than us, Em. Things we don't understand yet. Emily's mind reeled. Bigger than them? What did that even mean? The more Liam spoke, the more the words didn't add up. Why had he been so silent about all of this? Why hadn't he told her anything? And why had Eleanor stepped into the conversation as if she knew everything about Liam's involvement, as if she had been pulling strings for longer than Emily could comprehend? Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Emily's head whipped around to find a painting, one she had admired earlier in the evening, suddenly hanging at a precarious angle. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the canvas had been ripped in two. The wreckage on the floor wasn't just from a fall. It was deliberate. Someone had damaged it on purpose. And when she looked back at Eleanor, there was that same knowing smile on her lips. It's a shame, Eleanor remarked, her voice like silk. Some things just don't last, no matter how much effort you put into preserving them. Like relationships. She turned to Liam, a slight edge to her words. But sometimes, destruction is necessary for something new to emerge. The tension between them, between Emily, Liam, and Eleanor, had become almost unbearable. Fear gnawed at her as she stared at her phone, her mind racing. What if the message wasn't just a threat? What if something had happened to him? Emily had already lost track of how many times her instincts had been wrong, but this time, she couldn't ignore the rising panic in her chest. She needed to find him. She needed to make sure he was okay. When she arrived at Liam's apartment, the door was ajar. The dim light from inside flickered, casting eerie shadows across the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pushed the door open, calling out his name. No response. It was silent, too silent. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space as she moved deeper into the apartment, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. But then she saw it. On the floor, in the middle of the living room, was Liam's phone. The screen was cracked, the edges splintered, and it looked as though it had been thrown across the room in a fit of rage. Her stomach twisted with fear as she picked it up, her hands trembling. There was no sign of Liam. No trace of him anywhere. And then, on the back of the phone's shattered screen, there was a single message written in the same familiar handwriting. You should have listened. Emily dropped the phone in horror, her mind reeling. This wasn't just about art. This wasn't just about the gallery. This was something much darker. Someone was playing a deadly game, and Emily had become a pawn. She didn't know who to trust anymore, her brother, Eleanor, Julian, or even herself. The lines between friend and foe had blurred beyond recognition, and the danger had never felt more real. The truth was out there, but it seemed further away than ever. The only thing Emily knew for sure was that she was running out of time. The web was tightening, and it was only a matter of time before she was the next one to disappear. Just when Emily thought the walls were closing in on her, that she had finally reached the edge of the rabbit hole, the ground beneath her feet shifted in a way she never expected. The morning after finding Liam's phone, shattered on the floor of his apartment, she sat in her small kitchen, staring at the cracked screen. It was almost as if the phone was mocking her, one of the last traces of Liam now reduced to fragments. The weight of the uncertainty hung over her like a suffocating cloud. What had happened to him? Where was he? The message that had been scrawled across the back of the phone, "You should have listened," felt like the final, mocking punch in a game she didn't understand. But as her fingers hovered over the screen, the familiar pattern of thoughts looping through her mind, something she hadn't noticed before caught her eye, a subtle icon blinking on the top corner of the phone's display. A message, unread, buried beneath everything else. With trembling hands, Emily opened it. At first, it seemed like another cryptic warning. Another veiled threat. But the more she read, the more it unraveled everything she thought she knew. It wasn't him, Emily, the message said. It was you all along. You've been looking in the wrong direction. Liam is fine. He's been fine. He was never the target. But you're the one they're after. You're the one who broke the vase. Her breath caught in her throat as she reread the message. What was it talking about? The vase. She had heard that phrase before, the vase in the gallery. Eleanor had mentioned it, but Emily hadn't given it much thought at the time. She'd assumed it was part of Eleanor's cryptic way of speaking, a metaphor for some grander scheme. But this wasn't a metaphor. It was a key. It had always been a key. And suddenly, Emily understood, the vase wasn't just a mistake, it was the turning point. It wasn't the art world that had put her in danger, it was her connection to the gallery, the art, and that stupid vase. Her mind raced, the pieces falling into place, though she couldn't piece them together fast enough. It was as if she had been so focused on the wrong parts of the puzzle that she had missed the most crucial detail. The vase wasn't just a trivial accident. It was a part of something bigger, something far darker. A transaction. A deal. A promise. As Emily grappled with this realization, the door to her apartment creaked open, the soft sound almost drowned by the rapid pounding of her heartbeat. She hadn't heard anyone enter. She hadn't heard the footsteps in the hallway. But there, standing in the doorway, was someone she never thought would walk through it again. Liam. His appearance was like a jolt to her senses, an electric shock that made her stand up so fast she nearly knocked the table over. But it wasn't the sight of him that left her speechless, it was the way he was standing, the strange stillness in his posture. He was wearing the same clothes from the night she last saw him, though they were slightly rumpled, as if he had been through something intense. His eyes, though, were what struck her most. They were different. There was no warmth there, no comfort, no brotherly affection. There was only coldness. And something else, something that chilled her to the bone. Liam. Her voice barely registered as she spoke, as though it didn't belong to her. Where have you been? I thought you were gone. What happened? Liam didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at her, his gaze almost devoid of emotion. The silence stretched for several seconds, growing heavier with each passing moment. And then, finally, he spoke, but the words that left his mouth were nothing like what she had expected. "You were always too trusting, Em. It's why they came after you in the first place," he said flatly, his voice betraying no trace of guilt or regret. It was as if the person speaking was a stranger, not the brother she had known her entire life. "But you've been looking in all the wrong places." Emily took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The room felt too small. Too suffocating. "What are you talking about? Why are you saying this?" Liam's lips twitched in what could almost be called a smile, though there was no warmth in it. It was cold, almost mocking. "I didn't think you'd ever figure it out. But you were always the clever one, weren't you? The moment you broke that vase, everything changed." Emily's mind was reeling. She had no idea what he was talking about. The vase. What did it have to do with any of this? The messages, the threats, the mystery that had consumed her life, it all felt like it was spiraling out of control. "You were never supposed to be involved, Em," Liam continued, his voice devoid of empathy. "You just happened to stumble into something you couldn't understand. And now, you're a liability. But don't worry, everything will be fine. The people I'm working with, they'll take care of you. They'll make sure you don't interfere anymore." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're working with them? With Eleanor? With?" Liam stepped forward then, his eyes darkening as he closed the distance between them. "It's too late for you to back out now. You've seen too much, asked too many questions. This was never about art, or about you and Eleanor. It was about control. You just didn't see the bigger picture." The reality of his words slammed into her like a brick wall. Her brother, the one person she had trusted above all others, had been playing a part in all of this from the very beginning. He wasn't a victim in this twisted game, he was the architect of it. And the art, the gallery, the vase, it was all part of a much larger scheme she had been too naive to understand. She wasn't just caught in the web, she had always been part of it. "Everything you've been told has been a lie," Liam said, stepping even closer, his voice low, almost a whisper. "The people who have been threatening you, they're just pawns in a much bigger game. And now, you're one of them." The room felt like it was spinning around her. The ground beneath her feet seemed to crack open. Emily had spent so long looking for answers, chasing clues, piecing together fragments of the truth, only to discover that the truth was something far darker than she could have ever imagined. Liam wasn't just a victim. He wasn't just a bystander. He was the one pulling the strings all along. The web she had been tangled in had been carefully woven, and now, she was caught in it. And as her brother's cold, calculating gaze met hers, Emily realized just how far she had fallen. The truth was nothing like she had expected, and she had no idea where to go from here. All she knew was that the danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. The world around Emily seemed to close in on her, the walls of her apartment feeling more like a cage than a sanctuary. She couldn't remember the last time she had truly felt safe, or the last time she had been able to breathe without a sense of looming dread. She stared at Liam, who stood across the room, his presence now something far more sinister than anything she had ever imagined. The man she had once trusted more than anyone, the one who had always been her rock, was now a stranger, someone who had been playing a part in a dangerous game, and she was an unwitting pawn. Her mind was in a state of chaos, scrambling to make sense of what he had said, trying to figure out who was on her side, and who had already betrayed her. But the more she tried to piece it all together, the more impossible it seemed to find a way out. Liam's words echoed in her ears, the coldness of his confession still hanging in the air like a thick fog. "It's too late for you to back out now," he had said. "You've seen too much, asked too many questions." Those words repeated in her mind as if they were branded into her soul. And then, the bombshell: "The people I'm working with, they'll take care of you. They'll make sure you don't interfere anymore." Emily felt like she was losing control of her own life. It was as if she had stepped into a nightmare that she could no longer escape. The very foundation of everything she had known was shattering before her eyes. But it wasn't just Liam's betrayal that left her reeling, it was the impossible choice she now faced. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat reminding her of the critical decisions ahead. One wrong move, and everything she had worked for could come crumbling down. If she pushed too hard, would she lose everything? If she backed away now, would the truth be buried forever? The room was silent, save for the muffled sound of her breath, quick and shallow. Liam's eyes didn't waver, they were cold and unblinking. There was no trace of the brother she once knew in that gaze. She could feel her mind racing, calculating every possible outcome, but none of the answers felt like they would bring her peace. Every option felt like a trap. If she confronted him fully, if she pushed him for the truth, would it make everything worse? Would he lash out? Would the people behind this whole mess come for her and destroy everything she cared about? Liam, you don't understand, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking any louder would make the walls collapse around her. I need to know the truth. I need to know why you did this, why you're part of all of this. I can't just sit back and let this happen. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, one so wide she could feel herself falling into it. But before she could say anything else, before she could gather the courage to demand answers, her phone buzzed from the table behind her, jolting her from the tension of the moment. She reached for it, her hands shaking. The message was from an unknown number. Liam is not the real threat. You are. You have 24 hours to make a choice. Walk away from the truth, or everything you love will be destroyed. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The ultimatum was clear: leave it alone or lose everything. It wasn't just an empty threat. She knew the kind of people who had been involved in this, dangerous, powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And now, they were offering her a choice, one that felt impossible to make. What was more important? Her safety, or the truth? Liam seemed to sense her internal struggle, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. You can't do this, Em, he said, a faint edge of desperation creeping into his tone. You can't go after them. They'll ruin you. They'll make sure you're nothing. And it won't just be you, they'll come after everyone you care about. You don't have the power to stop them. The cold weight of his warning sank deep into her chest. It wasn't just an empty threat, it was a reality she could see unfolding before her eyes. Liam, her own brother, was trying to warn her, to make her understand that she was playing with fire. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. What was it that made Liam go so far into this darkness? What had he done to become so entangled in this dangerous world? Was it really about survival, as he claimed? Or was it something deeper, something she wasn't seeing? The message on her phone still burned in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was closer than ever. It was right there, within her reach. But the consequences of digging deeper were terrifying. Could she really walk away? Could she live with the unknown hanging over her, knowing that she hadn't even scratched the surface of what was truly going on? She didn't have long to decide. The threat had been made clear. They had given her a deadline. And she knew that if she didn't choose, if she didn't make a move soon, the stakes would only get higher. Liam wasn't just a casualty in this twisted game, he was a player. He had made his choice, and now it was her turn. Why don't you just let it go, Em? Liam's voice cracked, but there was no real emotion behind it. Why can't you just walk away? Just let it all disappear and go back to your life. It's not worth it. But the words didn't have the same pull they once would have. Emily wasn't the same person anymore. She couldn't unsee what she had already seen, couldn't erase the truth from her mind. The world she had been living in felt like a lie, and now, all she had left was the truth she was fighting to uncover. Suddenly, she felt a weight in her pocket. Her hand moved instinctively to pull out the small, worn envelope she had found hidden beneath the vase in the gallery. It was the same envelope from that night, the one she had tucked away in fear, unsure of what it meant. She hadn't even thought to open it since then, hadn't realized how crucial it might be to the answers she was looking for. Liam's eyes flickered toward the envelope, his gaze sharpening with a new intensity. You don't want to open that, he warned, his voice tight with panic. But the warning was too late. Emily had already torn it open. Inside was a single photograph, faded, blurry, but unmistakable. It was of her mother, standing in front of the very same gallery where everything had started. But what shocked her wasn't the image itself, it was the date scribbled on the back of the photo. It was dated 2 years ago. The same year her mother had mysteriously disappeared. The room seemed to tilt, spinning out of control. Everything she had believed, everything she had trusted, was unraveling in a single moment. The picture, the gallery, her mother, everything was connected, and Emily realized with terrifying clarity that her entire life had been a lie. Now, she had to choose: confront Liam and risk losing him forever, or walk away and keep running from the truth. She was trapped in a web of deceit, and no matter what she chose, there would be consequences. The clock was ticking, and she knew that if she didn't act soon, she might never be able to undo the damage. The truth was out there, but so was the danger. And Emily had no idea which one would find her first. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in on Emily as she stood frozen, staring at the photograph of her mother. The date written on the back was a dagger in her heart. 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the same year her mother had vanished without a trace, and now, everything was beginning to make sense, too much sense. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but each one was heavier than the last, pressing her deeper into a truth that she wasn't ready to face. Her mother had been tangled in this mess long before Emily even realized it. The gallery, the vase, Liam's strange behavior, it was all connected, and somehow, she had become a key player in a game much bigger than herself. But just as she thought she might start to understand the full scope of it all, just as she braced herself for the weight of the final truth, the phone buzzed again. She hesitated, the cold, dread-filled air pressing down on her, but then she picked it up. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely focus on the screen. The message was short, but the implications hit her like a freight train. Your time is up. The gallery isn't just a front. You'll never see Liam again if you don't listen. The words blurred together as her mind raced. Her pulse quickened as she thought of the one person who could still help her, who could have helped her from the start, Eleanor. But now, with everything that had happened, Emily wasn't so sure she could trust anyone. Not even Eleanor. Not Liam. Not herself. With every passing second, Emily's desperation grew. Her instincts screamed that she needed to act, that she couldn't afford to waste any more time, but the choices before her were impossible. What was it all for? The gallery? Art? Or was it about something even darker? And how was her mother tied to it all? She pushed herself toward the door, her legs unsteady beneath her, the weight of the secrets, the lies, and the threats growing heavier with each step. She wasn't sure if she was walking toward the truth or a deeper trap, but she knew she had no other choice. She needed answers. She had to confront someone, anyone, who could shed light on what was really going on, and maybe, just maybe, figure out why this conspiracy had dragged her into its depths. The first step outside the door felt like stepping into the unknown. Every corner, every shadow, every face seemed like a potential threat. She hadn't felt this exposed in a long time, and as the world seemed to spin faster around her, the more she felt the weight of the urgency. She didn't have much time. Whoever was behind this was closing in. They had already warned her to stop digging. What would they do if she didn't? Her phone rang just as she reached her car. The name on the screen made her blood run cold. It was Eleanor. Emily. Eleanor's voice came through, shaky, strained, unlike anything Emily had ever heard from her before. You need to listen to me. You've made a mistake, a huge mistake. You're in more danger than you realize. They've been watching you. They've been watching all of us. What do you mean, all of us? Emily asked, her voice breaking, trying to suppress the panic rising inside her. What's going on? Why didn't you tell me any of this? What's the gallery really about? Eleanor's voice faltered. I couldn't tell you, Emily. You didn't know. But I thought you'd figure it out eventually. The gallery, it's not just a place for art. It's a front for something far worse. Something I can't explain over the phone. But you were never supposed to get involved. Neither of us were. The people who control it all, they'll stop at nothing to make sure no one gets in their way. A chill ran down Emily's spine as she gripped the phone tighter. Who are these people, Eleanor? Who's behind it? And why are they after me? You're too close, Emily, Eleanor whispered. I can't say more, but you have to get out. You have to get away, now. If you don't, you won't just be putting yourself at risk, you'll be putting everyone you love in danger, including Liam. Especially Liam. The connection cut off abruptly, and Emily stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone screen as if willing Eleanor to call back, to explain everything. But there was no call. No more answers. Just the same cold silence that had followed her since the night she had first stepped into the gallery. She knew one thing for sure, whatever had happened to her mother, whatever had driven Liam to the place he was now, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. And now, Eleanor was gone, too. But something didn't sit right. She couldn't shake the feeling that the real betrayal was still ahead. She could hear Eleanor's voice again in her mind, frantic and panicked, but then the warning from the message flashed in her mind, you'll never see Liam again if you don't listen. Was it a threat? Or was Liam already gone? Was he already caught in the very web they had all been trying to avoid? A sudden realization hit Emily, a cold and awful truth that twisted her gut. She had spent so long running toward the truth, trying to uncover it piece by piece, but the truth had already found her. She wasn't just being manipulated. She had been a pawn from the beginning. Everything, every step she had taken, had led her to this point, to this moment. The people behind the gallery, the ones who controlled the art, the money, the power, they knew exactly what they were doing, and she had been playing into their hands all along. The photograph of her mother, the cryptic messages, the strange events leading up to this moment, they weren't just clues. They were part of a plan, a design that stretched farther than she could ever have imagined. And now, she was caught in the middle of it, with nowhere to turn. As her heart raced, a familiar car pulled up beside her. She didn't have to look twice to recognize it. It was Liam's. But something was wrong. He wasn't in the driver's seat. Someone else was. The man behind the wheel turned his head slightly as if sensing her gaze, and Emily froze. Her blood ran cold as the man met her eyes, his face pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't recognize him. But the feeling of dread that washed over her made it clear, this wasn't a coincidence. The web was closing in. And the next move, whatever it was, would determine everything. She had no choice but to act, but the question remained, could she trust the people who had always been closest to her? Or had they been part of the plan all along? The choice was hers. But the weight of it was suffocating. The game had changed, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to play anymore. All she knew was that she had to make a choice, and fast. The tension that had been building for weeks finally reached a boiling point. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she stood at the entrance of the gallery, the familiar space now feeling like a dark, suffocating labyrinth. She had pieced together the fragmented puzzle, everything had led her here, to this moment, and there was no turning back. Her hands clenched into fists, the urgency of the situation pressing down on her, suffocating her every thought. She had seen too much, uncovered too many secrets. But there was one more thing she needed to know. One more person she needed to face. And she knew he was waiting for her. The man who had been pulling the strings all along, the mastermind behind the conspiracy. It wasn't Liam. It wasn't Eleanor. It was someone far more dangerous, someone she had trusted, someone she never imagined would betray her. Her eyes scanned the gallery's dimly lit interior, the paintings on the walls casting strange, elongated shadows in the flickering light. The atmosphere was thick with unease, the air heavy with something she couldn't quite place. There was no sign of the man in the car. No one in the gallery seemed to notice her presence, and for a moment, she thought maybe she was alone, maybe she had miscalculated. But the feeling that had been gnawing at her for so long, the feeling that something was about to snap, refused to let go. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The message was simple: the truth is right in front of you. The words sent a chill down her spine, a shiver that made her wish she could forget everything she had learned. But she couldn't. She couldn't unsee the web of lies, the manipulation, the blood that had been spilled along the way. The game had always been rigged. And then, she saw him. Standing in the far corner of the room, his back turned toward her, was the last person she ever expected to see. It was Vincent, the gallery owner. The man who had been her confidant, her ally in this entire mess. The one who had introduced her to the world of art, the one who had shown her the door to a world she had never known. The one who had promised her safety, but now, standing in the shadows, he looked like a completely different person. A predator, not a protector. "Vincent," Emily called out, her voice sharp and tense. She couldn't keep the anger and betrayal from seeping into her words. "I should have known it was you." He turned slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his lips. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now gleamed with something darker, something that sent a surge of ice through her veins. "You're too smart for your own good, Emily," he said, his voice low, almost like a purr. "I should have seen it coming. But you were so eager to uncover the truth, weren't you? You just couldn't leave well enough alone." "Why, Vincent?" She took a step forward, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Why did you do all of this? What's really going on here? What's the point of all of this madness?" He shook his head, the smile fading, replaced by a cold, almost pitying look. "You were always too idealistic, Emily. You never understood how the world really works. This isn't about art, or beauty, or truth. It's about power. Control. The gallery was never just a place to display art. It's a business. A business that serves a much larger purpose." He stepped closer to her, his footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. "You think this is all some grand conspiracy, don't you? That everyone's been playing you? But you're wrong. You were never just a pawn, Emily. You were always meant to be here, at the center of it all." Emily's mind raced, the pieces clicking together in a sickening realization. The gallery. The vase. Her mother's disappearance. The photograph. It was all connected, more than she ever imagined. Vincent wasn't just the owner of the gallery. He was the head of a secret network, a mastermind of an operation that stretched far beyond the walls of this building. The people who had been pulling the strings, who had been manipulating her, weren't just after her. They had been using her all along, training her to be the perfect vessel for whatever it was they planned to do next. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "What are you planning, Vincent?" she demanded, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she was uncovering. "What's the real purpose behind all of this?" He chuckled darkly, his eyes glinting with something almost cruel. "You think you've uncovered something? That you're some kind of hero? No, Emily. You were a mistake. An inconvenience. But you've been useful in ways you can't even begin to understand. Everything has led to this moment. The gallery, the vase, your mother's disappearance, it was all to prepare you. To get you to this point." "What point?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, heart pounding in her chest as her world began to collapse around her. "What do you want from me?" He stepped even closer now, his breath cool against her skin, his presence overwhelming. "You, Emily. You are the final piece. The one who will complete the puzzle. The truth is simple, you're part of a much bigger picture. A picture that will change everything. And whether you accept it or not, the world is about to witness the start of something new. Something we've been waiting for." She felt her stomach drop. She understood now. She had been set up. All of it. The messages. The secrets. Her mother's mysterious disappearance. It was all part of a greater plan. And now, she was at the center of it, a pawn that was suddenly far more important than she could have ever known. Vincent wasn't just manipulating her, he was using her. And with one last, horrifying twist, she realized that the conspiracy wasn't just about art or power. It was about control over something even more dangerous. Something that, until now, had been hidden in plain sight. The door to the gallery slammed open, and two figures stepped in, Liam and Eleanor. But they weren't here to save her. They were here to finish what had been started. Vincent smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You see, Emily, the truth was right in front of you all along. The art, the gallery, they were never the point. It's you. You were always meant to play this part. And now, you'll understand what it really means to be a part of the plan." As Liam and Eleanor advanced, Emily realized with horror that the trap had been set for her from the very beginning. She had never been in control, never had a choice. And as Vincent's final words echoed in her ears, the true depth of the conspiracy crushed down on her like a tidal wave. The stakes were far higher than she had ever imagined, and in that moment, she realized the horrifying truth. The real battle was only just beginning. With no way out, the truth was clear. She had been a player in their game all along. And now, she was about to face the consequences of it. The days that followed felt like a blur, each moment weighed down by the heavy knowledge of everything Emily had uncovered. The gallery, once a place of mystery and fascination, was now a prison of truth. The walls that had once seemed so inviting now felt suffocating, trapping her in a world she no longer understood. Vincent's words still echoed in her mind, his cold, detached voice outlining the sinister plan he had crafted with such precision. She had been a pawn, a piece of something much larger, a puzzle she had only just begun to see the edges of. The shock of it all still lingered in her chest like a stone, suffocating her every breath. But in the end, after everything, the betrayal, the fear, the threats, there was one thing that became clear: Emily was not a victim. She wasn't just the person who had been manipulated. She had the power to change the story. After Vincent's disappearance, the gallery's doors were closed, sealed tight by the authorities. No one really knew what had happened to him or the strange network he had been a part of, but it was clear that whatever had been set in motion had already been disrupted. Eleanor and Liam had vanished too, leaving Emily with more questions than answers. The police had done their job at least, they'd made a show of it, but no one seemed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. They couldn't. The threads of it were tangled too deep in a world far beyond their reach. Emily had been forced to walk away from the wreckage of it all, her life uprooted in ways she couldn't even begin to untangle. But it wasn't just the physical destruction of the gallery that haunted her. It was the people. The faces. The promises made, only to be shattered in the cruelest of ways. She couldn't bring herself to forget them, especially not Liam and Eleanor, who had somehow been tied to this mess in ways she still didn't understand. There was something unfinished about their stories. And the deeper she dug into the wreckage, the more she realized that no matter how far she tried to run, the shadows of the past would always follow. It was late one evening, weeks after everything had fallen apart, when Emily stood outside the gallery, watching the now empty building fade into the darkness. The streetlights cast long shadows, stretching across the sidewalk in a way that made the place feel even emptier. But as she stared at the old, worn facade of the gallery, a strange sense of calm washed over her. It was over, in a way. The danger had passed, or at least, that's what everyone believed. But Emily knew better. There were still pieces left unaccounted for, still things left in the shadows. The puzzle was far from complete, and she knew it. Maybe she wasn't meant to understand all of it, not right now, anyway. But she had changed. The Emily who had walked through those gallery doors months ago was no longer the same. She was stronger, smarter, wiser. The lies had been uncovered, but the truth, as unsettling as it was, had set her free in a way she couldn't fully explain. She wasn't the same woman who had fallen for the promises and the art. She had learned the hard way that not everything could be solved, not every mystery had a neat ending, but sometimes, accepting that was the only way forward. As she turned to walk away from the gallery for good, something caught her eye. A figure standing across the street, half hidden in the shadows. Emily froze, her heart skipping a beat. Her breath caught in her throat as she squinted, trying to make out the face. It wasn't Liam, not at first glance. It wasn't Eleanor either. But it was someone who knew her. Someone who had been watching her. A chill ran down her spine, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. She felt a pang of fear, a reminder that nothing was ever truly over. The figure stepped forward, emerging into the dim light. Emily's stomach twisted as she recognized the face. It was the man from the gallery, the one who had driven her to this point, the one whose name she hadn't even known until now. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but there was something in them, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, his presence unnerving in the silence of the night. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, his voice low and almost regretful. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. "Why are you here?" Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What do you want?" He shrugged, his face unreadable. "I don't want anything from you. Not anymore. I'm just here to make sure you understand something." Emily's mind raced. Understand what? "The world doesn't stop turning because you've figured out the truth," he said quietly. "There are always bigger forces at play. Forces you'll never fully understand. But you've seen enough now to know that the game doesn't just end because you're tired of playing. The pieces are always in motion." Emily felt a shiver of realization, a dawning understanding of what he meant. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. Vincent may have disappeared, but whatever had been set in motion was far from finished. Whoever was pulling the strings, the ones who had used her, manipulated her, and played her for their own gain, was still out there, watching, waiting. "But that's not the point, is it?" she asked, her voice steady now, more certain than she had ever been. "The point is, I'm not playing anymore." The man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something almost like respect crossing his face. He didn't speak, but for the first time, Emily saw something in him that she hadn't expected: vulnerability. A crack in the armor. And just as quickly as it appeared, the moment was gone, the man fading back into the shadows, disappearing as mysteriously as he had arrived. Emily stood there for a long time, processing everything, the weight of it all settling in her chest. She had learned the hard way that not every mystery had a clean resolution, not every question had an answer. And maybe that was okay. Because the truth was, there was always more beneath the surface, always more lurking in the dark corners of the world. She didn't need to understand it all. She didn't need to fix everything. Sometimes, survival was enough. Sometimes, letting go was the only way forward. With a deep breath, Emily turned away from the gallery for good, stepping into the unknown, knowing that the story wasn't over. It was just waiting to be written. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid.